Hello, back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movie's entitled Windtalkers. Let's get straight into the storyline. The film takes place in 1943. At that time, a corporal from the American Marines named Joe Enders was fighting on Solomon Island. There, he was ordered to capture and defend a swamp that was the base of the Japanese defense on the island. Although the Japanese troops were overwhelming and had taken control of the entire terrain, Enders' squad was overwhelmed. They had asked him to withdraw from the battle, but Joe Enders, who upheld the orders of his superiors, decided to persevere. Finally, the Japanese troops continued to attack them all and caused the Americans to be defeated.
We got nothing in there! We're out of ammo! They told us to hold the position! And that's what we're gonna do! We gotta get out of here!
Long story short, 3 months later, the scene moved to an area of the Rocky Mountains in the state of Utah, United States. At that time, a man named Ben was seen, who was given the tribal name Yazzie because he was a descendant of the Navajo Indian tribe. At that time, Ben decided to become an American military soldier to defend his homeland in the ongoing Second World War. On his journey, Ben was not alone. Apparently, there were several other conscripted soldiers from the Navajo tribe, one of whom was his own best friend named Charlie, or Whitehorse as his tribal nickname. They will all be taken to Pendleton Military Camp, California, to be given training.
Raise your right hand.
We're to support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
There, they, as Navajo tribesmen, would be used as officers sending, receiving, and translating secret radio messages using their own language while fighting Japanese troops in the Pacific region.
I just want to be code talkers. Show me some brains. Think. Tortoise. Very good.
All of these plans were deliberately carried out by the American military because the Japanese always managed to break the code and secret messages when they communicated. This led to the Japanese being able to figure out American tactical plans in their war strategy. The Navajo Indian language was chosen to be the secret communication language of the Americans because it was unique, with a vocabulary that was very difficult to crack.
Transcribe now.
Victor, this is X-ray over. Trust with the chief.
I need this message decrypted.
Request fire support. We have target at 119er.
Meanwhile, elsewhere, at the American Military Hospital in Kaneohe Bay, Oahu Island, Hawaii, Corporal Joe Enders was seen surviving the deadly battle. He was brought there with other wounded troops to undergo treatment. Although still recovering, Corporal Joe insisted on being deployed back to the battlefield to avenge the deaths of all his team members in the Battle of Solomon Island. Even though the medical authorities advised Joe to take complete rest due to an injury to his ear, which caused one of his ears to go deaf and loss of balance in walking. To realize his intentions, he conspired with a female nurse named Rita to assist him in conducting a fit and proper test so that he could remain an active soldier.
Amazing.
For his efforts, Joe Enders was sent back to the military base because he was declared fit to go into combat. He was then called by his superior, Major Melitz, to be briefed on his next assignment. Joe would be assigned to participate in the battle on Saipan Island and keep the Navajo warriors alive. They were the most valuable people to the American military because they served as secret messengers in battle.
The Navy have decided to go to great lengths to protect it.
Indians, sir?
Navajo, to be exact. Keep his ass safe. Your job is to keep him alive so he can do his job.
We're killing Japs, not babysitting some Indian.
Man's a Navajo, not a code talker. Your mission is to protect the code.
On that day, Joe, now a sergeant, met a sergeant named Pete Anderson. Both were assigned to the 2nd JASCO, or 2nd Joint Assault Company, at the Battle of Saipan Island. At the same time, a secret Navajo cipher force had also arrived at the Hawaiian military base. Ben Yazzie was ordered to join Sergeant Joe, while Charlie joined Sergeant Anderson.
Al! Max.
Whitehorse. This is Yazzie. Ben.
Although their first meeting was awkward, the two sergeants didn't want to be assigned as guards to the Navajo people, like babysitters. They wanted to fight freely and without burden against the Japanese troops. Long story short, after several months at the base, the long-awaited time finally arrived. On 16th June 1944, 2nd JASCO troops began to be sent to Saipan Island to add to the strength of the 1st JASCO troops, who had become pioneer troops. In the battle plan, they were assigned to attack and capture the bases of the Japanese troops on the island so that the Americans could control the island of Saipan as a whole.
Front of the whole damn division. We're gonna be sniffing out enemy positions to do for the last 4 months. All right?
That night, they had a farewell party because the next day, all the troops would start departing by warship to face a big war that they had never experienced before, especially for the military troops who had very little experience with war. After some time traveling at sea, finally, for the first time, the 2nd JASCO troops successfully landed on the island of Saipan. At the beginning of the landing, they were immediately greeted with an artillery attack and a barrage of machine guns launched from the Japanese troops' defense bunkers. At that time, the American troops, consisting mainly of military soldiers with minimal experience, were panicked and frightened, so many of them died after a few minutes on the island. Under such battle conditions, the American troops couldn't push forward and engage in close combat. The enemy's position on the hill gave them the advantage and the freedom to attack any American soldiers who tried to approach them. So, the only way to win this battle was to carry out long-range attacks through heavy artillery from American warships on standby around the island. Sergeant Joe's squad was tasked with providing information and ensuring the location of enemy coordinates on the hill so that the attack would not be misdirected.
Target reference. Log 1. Elevation 050. Relay the damn coordinates!
For the first time, Ben and Charlie worked together to send secret coded messages to the attacking ships.
水の中で喋っているように聞こえます。英語でやりましょうか。
One, south 700, elevation 050.
After the successful attack, American troops were able to move forward to sweep and secure the enemy base area from the remaining Japanese troops. Although they kept moving, it turned out that there were still many Japanese troops waiting in trenches and hiding holes. In that incident, many members of Sergeant Joe's squad died horribly. The situation only made Ben Yazzie realize that this war was not as easy as he had imagined. This was proven when Sergeant Joe, as the squad leader, felt responsible for carrying out the most difficult mission, which was to destroy a bunker of Japanese troops who had automatic machine guns. Sergeant Joe took this dangerous action just to keep his men alive. Thanks to his hard work, Sergeant Joe finally managed to destroy the bunker and ended the day's battle with a victory for the Americans. At night, all the American troops gathered in the captured area. There, they rested and joked around to unwind. Charlie and Ben were also there. For the first time, they prayed according to the beliefs of the Indians in front of all the American troops. They prayed for the fallen soldiers to go to the realm of peace and immortality, making everyone who saw it feel amazed.
Give it a rest, Anderson.
The next day, all the soldiers remained at the site, awaiting further orders to return to the battlefield to destroy the Japanese defense base on the island. However, there was a big problem that morning. While Ben Yazzie was bathing in the river, he was suddenly attacked by his own comrade Chick. Because of his oriental face and slanted eyes, Chick thought Ben Yazzie was a Japanese soldier disguised in an American Army uniform. After the fight calmed down, all the 2nd JASCO troops received orders to move forward and lay siege to the Japanese defense base. They were transported by military truck through a plantation and would later join the 1st JASCO troops. However, halfway through, they came under sudden attack from an artillery barrage. Apparently, the attack came from American troops who mispositioned their target coordinates. The misdirected attack left the 2nd JASCO troops completely cornered, resulting in many casualties. Moreover, Japanese troops who knew the situation took advantage of the moment to make a surprise attack from the top of the hill. The tense situation forced Sergeant Joe to think hard. He decided to bring his troops forward to face the barrage of Japanese troops. At that moment, Sergeant Joe ordered Ben Yazzie to send a message to the artillery attackers to change their target. However, a big problem occurred because Ben Yazzie's radio communication device was damaged by Japanese gunfire.
Just take it off!
In this situation, they had no other choice. Sergeant Joe's only communication option was to steal the Japanese radio inside his base. Ben Yazzie suddenly had an idea. He would disguise himself as a Japanese soldier because his face was very similar to that of Japanese people. To launch the action, Sergeant Joe decided to help him by pretending to be a prisoner of war who was captured by Ben Yazzie. The action was quite tense because if they were wrong just a little, their lives would not be saved. However, Ben Yazzie's skill in disguise and their cooperation tricked the Japanese troops until they were able to paralyze the radio officers and contact the artillery troops to bomb the location area.
Get on the radio! Bowie White, this is Carson Red! Bowie White, this is Carson Red! Redirect fire at 325!
After the Japanese base in the area was taken, the American troops buried the bodies of their comrades in arms who had died in battle that day. In fact, at the same time, Sergeant Joe was approached by one of his superiors to be given a Star of Honor for his actions that had successfully entered the enemy base and saved more American military troops. At that time, Sergeant Joe refused the award because he felt that all these actions were not his own idea but Ben Yazzie's initiative. So, he decided to give the star to his fallen men so that it could be given to his wife.
Send that to Nellie's wife.
Sergeant Joe was very different from other soldiers. It was only later that night that Ben Yazzie found out about his experiences as a soldier. For Sergeant Joe, all the awards were not important because the most important thing was that he could be a loyal soldier, willing to die for the country, and truly a very dedicated war maniac. After a night of rest in the area, long story short, the next day, the 2nd Recon troops were again ordered to move forward. This time, they would walk to a Japanese settlement in a village called Tanapag Village to secure the village from Japanese troops hiding among the civilians and to ensure that the area was suitable for a temporary base. When the Americans entered the village, there was nothing unusual or suspicious. In fact, they began to mingle and socialize with the friendly and welcoming villagers. However, when Sergeant Anderson decided to make the village a temporary base, they were suddenly attacked by Japanese troops who kept coming over the hill. The American 2nd Recon troops, who were unprepared at the time, were blindly ambushed by Japanese troops twice their number. This sent Sergeants Joe and Anderson into a panic as they were responsible for 2 Navajo warriors who were valuable to the American military. No matter how hard they defended, in the end, the Japanese troops were unstoppable. They continued to push in to target the highly sought-after American secret messenger. In that precarious situation, in the end, Sergeant Anderson had to die when he tried to save Charlie. The incident was seen by Sergeant Joe when he saw Charlie, who had now been captured and was about to be taken prisoner by the Japanese. It was at that moment that Charlie tried to give a signal message to Sergeant Joe so that he would not hesitate to kill him rather than being taken prisoner and leaking secret Navajo language messages to the Japanese. The incident ended the day's fighting with a landslide victory for the Americans. However, the incident really made Benyazi feel angry with his superiors because he never thought that Sergeant Joe would have the heart to do all that to his own best friend. From there, Benyazi never seemed to care about the meaning of this war because, at this time, all he thought about was how he could get home as soon as possible. Long story short, after securing Tanapag village, they were ordered to advance towards the northern tip of Saipan Island to surround the Japanese defense base on the last point of the island. They continued on foot, and now the 2nd Recon troops began to join the 1st Jasco troops led by a colonel named Gunny. They began artillery attacks on the mountains that were thought to be the last base of defense for the Japanese troops. This time, their mission was to neutralize the mountains to protect the 8th Marines behind them. After the artillery barrage, they now began to enter the enemy's defense area with extreme caution. Although at that time, Benyazi was still showing an emotional attitude, as if he didn't care about his death. Until unexpectedly, they found themselves in the middle of a landmine field deliberately spread by the Japanese troops.
Jesus Christ, we're in the middle of a goddamn minefield!
At the same time, a barrage of Japanese machine guns suddenly attacked them massively. All American troops under Colonel Gunny's command tried to save themselves, not caring about the landmines between their legs. In the end, however, Colonel Gunny was hit by enemy fire, causing him to die in the early days of the battle. Now, command and responsibility were automatically taken over by Sergeant Joe. With only 4 men left, he began to look frustrated, especially when Sergeant Joe saw Benyazi deliberately performing reckless actions even without orders. It was especially troublesome for him because Sergeant Joe was still responsible for the safety of his men. Even now, the pressure of war was getting to him as Japanese artillery began to attack a convoy of American 8th Marines heading their way. The attack destroyed several American Sherman tanks and paralyzed dozens of infantrymen. For the last time, Sergeant Joe took the initiative to order Benyazi to send a message requesting airstrike assistance in order to destroy the heavy weapons of the Japanese troops who were relentlessly attacking. But at the same time, Benyazi's radio was captured by Japanese troops. Sergeant Joe tried to get it back, although at the same time, he and Benyazi had to be hit by an attack that caused them to be injured quite badly. Even so, they still managed to carry out their duties.
This is Carson Red, Arizona. I say again, Arizona.
It was then that Benyazi began to realize what the duties of a military soldier were all about. He began to see the great responsibility that Sergeant Joe carried in order to uphold the orders of his superiors. And all of that was evident when he tried to save Sergeant Joe from death, even though at that time he had just learned that Sergeant Joe was dying from a bullet that hit his chest. The airstrikes from the warplanes coincided with Sergeant Joe's last moments. All of his men could not bear to see the superior they had relied on begin to say the last prayers to accompany his departure. Finally, at the last Japanese defense base, Sergeant Joe left forever.
Holy Mother God.
The end of the film shows that Benyazi has now returned to his hometown with a war victory for the Americans. Up in the mountains, he and his family pray for the late Sergeant Joe with Indian beliefs, hoping that he will find peace and happiness in eternity.